Well, today's announcement does follow criticism that the influx of new residents exacerbated the housing shortage in this country, also the demand on services, and also comes after pollsters have tracked a drop in support for immigration to this country. With more, we're now joined by the Immigration Minister, Marc Miller. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me on, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with what we heard from Pierre Poilievre, because he has responded to your announcement this morning. He calls it a massive admission of failure and, quote, desperate to save himself from Liberal MPs who want him gone, Trudeau now admits his immigration policies caused housing, healthcare and job crises, but he can't fix what he broke. How do you respond to that statement from Mr. Poilievre?
I mean, Michael, that sounds like the immature response of a guy that spent the last 20 years punching a paycheck in the House of Commons and not getting out of Ottawa. He's not proposing anything concrete. He's just trying to lay blame like he always does. He's so lazy that he hasn't even come up with a slogan yet, so I'm waiting for that to be able to comment further. The reality is this is a reasonable plan that we've put forward for reasonable controlled growth of the immigration system in Canada. Certainly there's a time and space to discuss the large increase in volume of immigration over the last couple of years. Actually, that's helped us come out and avoid a recession and deal with a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence in COVID. So there's a lot of good there, but there are a lot of challenges and conundrums that have come up. Impact on affordability. You can't blame all that on immigrants, but certainly there's a space where we can have a rational discussion about that increase in volume and the need to correct. Any responsible government needs to adjust, correct, and propose what we're proposing today. This is the product of about a year of work, as these levels plans are. And frankly, we've listened to Canadians.
Mm-hmm. But was it a mistake to open the doors as widely as the government did?
I think the challenge is having a reflection on the fact that we didn't, as the Prime Minister said, we didn't get the mix quite right. Certainly that rapid volume, which was important in some aspects, has had an impact on the ability of Canada to respond, our infrastructure, our housing stock. And it's something I think that we as a government responsibly need to adjust for. We've heard from Canadians, we've heard from economists of where that sweet spot is. We think today's plan over the next 3 years will be a responsible response to controlled migration in this country. And it's something that for the first time we're actually integrating temporary residency to give a full snapshot of what immigration writ large looks like in this country. And I think it's something Canadians can be proud of as we continue to build that consensus that has, I acknowledge, been under threat for some time.
Mm-hmm. Under threat. And it does make me wonder, because we have seen, I think one of the polls I saw, like a 16% drop in the percentage of Canadians who still support immigration to this country. Does your government bear responsibility for that drop in support?
I think there's lots of responsibility to go around, Michael, including the federal government. What that poll actually also said was that there is strong support for immigration, particularly in my home province where that issue has become weaponized. Politicians weaponizing this contribute to the problem. But the reality is that consensus is under threat. We still have it. It is still positive in this country. It's not unanimous. But we know what happens when that consensus breaks totally. In countries that some of us have looked towards for inspiration at times, whether it's Sweden, whether it's Germany, and we see some stuff going on in the US that is of significant concern to their closest neighbor. We don't want to get there as a country, and that's why it's incumbent on any government to take that responsibility and to adjust, and that's precisely what we're doing today.
Now, we're talking about addressing a miscalculation, but I'm wondering if what is being pursued today will create another miscalculation of its own, because Canada still relies on new Canadians to fill critical jobs in healthcare, construction, other sectors. Does this attempt to correct what was decided on in the past create other challenges going forward? For example, the shortage of healthcare workers we have in this country.
I mean, undoubtedly what Canadians want is an immigration system that makes sense to the needs of the economy. And that's precisely what we'll have to continue to do, whether it's in construction, where there's a net need from people coming from the exterior, or in the healthcare system, where there is that same need. We'll have to continually adjust for that. We think this particular plan is reasonable, and we'll have space to make sure that we prioritize temporary residents that do have that skill set, that come in, have perhaps been here for 3 years, gotten an education, have that beginning of integration, don't have the same pressure that someone coming immediately from abroad would have on the housing stock. That's something that we'll be looking on and looking at and continue to look at to make sure that it works, particularly in sectors where there will be needs. Let's not be shy in saying that there are sectors of the economy where we still will have to bring people from abroad because we can't train them up in the time we need them for currently, and that's the constant challenge that the government's face with matching supply and demand. But we also can't let industry, let businesses, let universities and colleges run wild at an open trough. It has to be regulated and properly managed by the federal government.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the big arguments for more immigration to this country is Canada's low fertility rate. It has one of the lowest fertility rates in the world. We have this large cohort approaching retirement, are retiring right now. Do we need to be worried with the government cutting the number of people being allowed into this country? Do we need to be worried about the sustainability of social programs like CPP?
Well, I think immigration is a very important response to the phenomenon that other countries like us are facing, the higher age workforce, aging out of people, retiree ratio to people working 7 to 1 when I was born, now closer to 3 to 1. The fertility rate is something that I think we perhaps have to have a conversation on. It isn't up to immigration to fully address that. We need to create conditions in this country, whether it's affordable daycare, whether it's a child family benefit, where it is not as expensive to raise a number of children. That is something I think that we need to have a continual conversation on, and immigration can't fix that entirely, but it is one of the tools that we can have to address it.
Mm-hmm. You know, before we're done, Minister, I do have to ask the question, because we can't ignore the fact that at the end of your news conference today, the questions asked of the Prime Minister were about his future as Liberal leader, not so much about your policy change, which makes me wonder, is Mr. Trudeau's leadership now a distraction for your government?
I think it's a distraction to who we need to be focusing on, which is Pierre Poilievre and the current iteration of the Conservative Party, which is extremely toxic, and I think fundamentally, if elected, would be destructive to Canada. Canadians are starting to realize that. He's not only an unqualified, unpleasant character, he is starting to roll out policies and points of views that we've seen him take in the past over the last 20 years of his incessant talking in the House of Commons about what he would do to this country. Canadians need to focus a little more intensely on that, and every minute spent on sort of this internal Liberal stuff is a minute that we're not spending focusing on the real threat that is Pierre Poilievre, and that's where my sights are solely focused on.
But you are a friend of the Prime Minister. What about Liberals who are disaffected with the Prime Minister? Can you convince them of that?
Look, Michael, over the past 40 years, I don't talk about this too publicly, but no one's had more fights with the Prime Minister than I have, but they've always been to his face and quite frank. Have I been right all the time? No. Has he been right all the time? No. But I think that relationship is one that I certainly value and feel is important. And I do feel that my colleagues that decided to serve with them in 2015, particularly when we were in third place, owe it to him to talk to him to his face and tell him exactly what they think, and then we move on. If there's a line drawn, then they need to then act. At the same time, we need to put our differences aside and move on to what the greater threat is. What I heard yesterday, and I have been tough on my colleagues because I'm upset at how it leaked and how there was a lot of talking behind people's backs, but I will give them the credit of having spoken quite honestly and frankly, not that I will talk about it on TV, to him yesterday, and I think for that they deserve credit, and I think we are all focused on making sure that Pierre Poilievre does not become the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Marc Miller, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael.